There is a country in this world that appears like a giant when viewed from afar. Its land is wide, its people are many, its resources are rich, and its history is ancient. From the outside, it looks powerful, proud, and promising. But when you come closer, when you walk through its streets, listen to its people, and watch its leaders, you begin to see the truth. The giant is not truly a giant. It is a dwarf wearing borrowed robes. The kingdom of rotating thrones. Long ago, this country was filled with hope. The people believed that one day it would rise to become a shining example to the world. The soil was fertile, the rivers generous, and beneath the ground lay rivers of black gold that other nations desperately desired. But the country fell into the hands of a small circle of men. They were old. Not just old in age, but old in thinking. Their ideas were fossils. Their minds were museums of outdated dreams. Yet these men never wished to leave power. They had built a throne that rotated only among themselves. When one became too weak to rule, he did not step aside for the young or the wise. Instead, he passed the seat to his closest friend, his loyal ally, or his aging rival. And when the chair returned again, they welcomed it like a crown that belonged to them forever. The people called it democracy, but in truth it was a circle of power that never broke. The fear of youth. The rulers feared only one thing: the youth. The young were energetic, they were educated, they were angry, they saw through the lies. And so the elders created a clever plan. They told the young to wait. Your time will come, they said, but the time never came. Instead, the old men prepared their sons and daughters. These children were flown to the finest schools in distant lands. They learned politics not through hardship, but through privilege. When the old rulers became too frail to stand at rallies or too tired to pretend, their children appeared like princes and princesses ready to inherit the throne. The throne was never meant for the people. It was meant for families. The business of poverty. This country was rich, too rich in fact, but the rulers understood something important. If the people were comfortable, they would ask questions. If they were educated, they would demand accountability. So the rulers fed the country poverty like a farmer watering crops. They weakened the economy. They destroyed opportunity. They made survival so difficult that the citizens had no time to challenge them. A hungry man does not organize protests. A struggling mother does not study politics. A desperate youth does not demand reform. He simply searches for his next meal. And so poverty became the most powerful political weapon, the theater of elections. Every few years, the old rulers transformed themselves. Their pride vanished overnight. They wore simple clothes. They smiled endlessly. They visited markets, shook dusty hands, and bent their aging backs to greet the same people they ignored for years. They promised roads, they promised electricity, they promised jobs, they promised a future that sparkled like gold. But once the elections were won, the smiles disappeared. The simple clothes returned to expensive suits. The humble greetings turned into guarded convoys. The leaders who once bowed before the people now traveled with dozens of armed escorts. Sirens screaming through traffic as if the citizens were enemies rather than owners of the nation. The industry of chaos. Power, however, was not always won by promises. Sometimes it was won by fear. And so, hidden in shadows, the rulers hired men who thrived in darkness. Street gangs, violent thugs, cold-hearted assassins. They funded unrest when elections approached. They spread chaos in rival regions. They armed desperate young men with small weapons and large lies. Sometimes entire communities woke up to the sounds of gunfire. Sometimes villages were abandoned. Sometimes innocent people disappeared. The rulers spoke loudly about peace on television, yet behind closed doors they financed the very storms they pretended to calm. Chaos was useful. Fear was profitable. The land of black gold. Beneath the soil of this country lay vast oceans of crude oil. The resource alone could have built highways across the land, powered every home with electricity, and turned cities into centers of innovation. But the rulers saw it differently. Oil was not a blessing. It was a private treasure chest. They allowed the nation's refineries to decay like abandoned factories. Pipes rusted. Machines stopped. Buildings collapsed into silence. Then the same leaders turned to the people and said, "We must import fuel from other lands." The citizens paid high prices for what was already theirs. And somewhere in distant banks, secret accounts grew larger and larger. The travelers. The rulers had another strange habit. Whenever they were sick, they did not trust the hospitals in their own country. Whenever they desired rest, they did not vacation in their own cities. Instead, they boarded luxurious airplanes and traveled to the most developed nations on Earth. There they enjoyed clean hospitals, beautiful roads, uninterrupted electricity, and safe environments. They healed themselves using the very systems they refused to build for their own people.
Then they returned home and praised their leadership. The weight of age. As the years passed, the rulers grew older and older. Some struggled to walk without assistance. Some forgot their own speeches. Some spoke slowly, their voices trembling with fatigue. But still, they refused to release power. The throne had become an addiction. To rule, even poorly, was better than to rest. They believed wisdom came with age, but wisdom had left them long ago. All that remained was stubbornness. The people who watched. The citizens were not blind. They watched everything. They saw how wealth disappeared. They saw how promises evaporated. They saw how the same old faces returned again and again, like actors in a never-ending play. In marketplaces, in buses, in classrooms, and in quiet homes, the people whispered, "This cannot continue forever." But change was slow. The rulers controlled the money. They controlled the institutions. They controlled the story told to the world. Yet something powerful was quietly growing. The awakening. The youth began to connect with one another. They spoke online. They shared ideas. They studied the history of their country and realized something important. A giant does not remain a dwarf forever. One day, the giant remembers its strength. The young began to dream of a nation where leadership meant service rather than profit, where resources built hospitals instead of secret mansions, where elections were not battles but choices, where the throne belonged not to a circle of aging men, but to the people themselves. The question of the future. The old rulers still sit on their rotating thrones. They still promise. They still travel abroad. They still believe they are clever. But history has a strange habit. It moves slowly, and then suddenly. And somewhere in that country, the one that looks like a giant but behaves like a dwarf, the next chapter is waiting to be written, not by the old, but by the people who have waited long enough. Question to the viewers and listeners. What continent and country do you think this country is? Write your answers and contributions in the comments section. And don't forget to press the like button, share, and press the subscribe button. Thank you all.